And welcome to the Suppress Herald once again. It is Saturday, the 7th of March, and the propaganda machine at the Press Herald is, per usual, in full tilt propaganda mode. And we've got a couple things we're just going to deal with. Really, what we want to talk about is propaganda and how it works. And it happens every day in your local newspapers. In this case, the Suppress Herald here in Maine is owned by the National Distrust for Local News, which is owned by billionaire oligarchs that are out to control what you think and what you do and how you act and how you live. And very simply, they want to take control of you. And it comes right down to them buying local newspapers who which are run by people in the editorial department who share their goals and share their policies and share their Democrat liberal approach to governing and running your life. Very simply. We're going to keep it simple today and just get into a couple of things. Of course, we've got the war in the Middle East with Iran, and right there you can start in with how they try to undermine Trump and conservatives and so forth, Israel, and it just goes right in. And we have the Associated Press is doing most of the reporting, and I find this really interesting how these articles say absolutely nothing, and then I'll raise how they say nothing and how important that is to understand. You've got the headline here: as Israel strikes Lebanon, Trump rules out talks absent Iran's unconditional surrender. And they go through, Donald Trump appeared Friday to rule out talks with Iran absent its unconditional surrender. Israeli warplanes bombed Beirut and Tehran. Strikes in Lebanon were the heaviest since a 2024 ceasefire ended the last war between Israel and the Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants. The U.S. and Israel have battered Iran with strikes, targeting its military capabilities, leadership, and nuclear program. The stated goals and timelines for the war have repeatedly shifted as the U.S. has at times suggested it seeks to topple Iran's government or elevate new leadership from within. Meanwhile, Russia has provided Iran with information that could help Tehran strike the U.S. military, according to two officials familiar with U.S. intelligence on the matter. According to two officials they don't name. There is where it starts, folks. This is propaganda. Two officials they do not name. Okay? In other developments, evidence emerged suggesting that an explosion that killed scores of Iranian students at his school was likely caused by U.S. airstrikes that also hit an adjacent compound associated with the regime's Revolutionary Guard. That's just mentioned there, okay? Then you've got Qatar's energy minister predicting a widespread shutdown of Gulf energy exports that could send oil to $150 a barrel. They want to scare you into turning against Trump and his position with this attacks on Iran. The price for a barrel of benchmark U.S. crude rose above $90 on Friday for the first time in more than 2 years. Oh, during Biden, it wasn't a problem, I guess. $4 a gallon for gas. Russia providing data to Iran, officials say. Russia has provided Iran with information that could help Tehran strike American warships, aircraft, and other assets in the region, according to two officials familiar with U.S. intelligence on the matter, but we don't name the officials. Then you've got, here's the best part. Those comments were likely to raise further questions about the end game of the war. The fighting has killed at least 1,230 people in Iran, more than 200 in Lebanon, and around a dozen in Israel, according to officials in those countries. 6 U.S. troops have been killed. It's really interesting here. Here's where it really heavy strikes on Iran and retaliatory attacks. So they just talk on generalities. And then back in that same article, down just a little, elsewhere, new information surfaced suggesting that a deadly February 28th explosion at a school in the Iranian city of Manab, some 680 miles southeast of Tehran, was likely caused by U.S. airstrikes. The information included satellite images, expert analysis, a U.S. official, and public information released by U.S. and Israeli military forces. Iranian state media has said more than 165 people were killed in the blast, most of them children. Iran has blamed Israel and the U.S. for the explosion. Neither country has accepted responsibility, though Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said earlier in the week that the U.S. was investigating. So, all that is speculation. I'd like to remind our audience that back when we were getting into the attacks after Hamas attacked Israel, killed 1,200 plus people, took hundreds of people hostage, and the Israelis retaliated and started attacking Hamas. There was a school hit. Immediately, Hamas blamed Israel. Immediately, the media blamed Israel. And it was widely reported that Israel had attacked a school and killed people. Turns out it was a errant Hamas missile fired by Hamas, who were hiding near that school, hiding their missile site near that school. An errant, basically a Dubber missile, misfired, landed in the yard and blew up by that school in the parking lot of the school. It was not U.S. or Israeli military that had done that, but the reporting was already out there. They were more than happy to report that the Israelis had attacked a school. So hold your breath here. We may find that it's not what they're reporting. And further, this is how propaganda works. Again, listen up to this. Within that story, on the same page in the Suppress Herald, is the headline, "Deadly Blast at an Iranian School Was Likely a U.S. Airstrike. Evidence Suggests." We've heard evidence like that before. Satellite images, expert analysis, a U.S. official, and public information released by the U.S. and Israeli militaries suggest an explosion that killed scores of Iranian students at a school was likely caused by U.S. airstrikes that also hit an adjacent compound associated with the regime's Revolutionary Guard. The February 28th strike, which had the highest reported civilian death toll since the war began, has come under staunch criticism from the United Nations and human rights monitors. Of course it has, long before we even know who was responsible. More than 165 people were killed, most of them children, in the blast during school hours, according to Iranian state media. So most of the information we have is from the Iranian state media. Satellite images taken Wednesday and reviewed by the Associated Press show most of the school in the city of Manab, some 680 miles southeast of Tehran, reduced to rubble, a crescent shape punched into its roof. Experts say that tight pattern of damage visible on the satellite photos is consistent with a targeted airstrike. We do not know that it was not an Iranian missile. Could well be a failed missile fired by the Iranians that landed, fell on the school. We don't know that. Iran has blamed Israel and the United States for the blast. Neither country has accepted responsibility. There's no real evidence shown yet. Asked about the strike at the school at a Pentagon media briefing Wednesday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, "All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets, but we're taking a look and investigating it." Several factors. Here we go with the Associated Press lying and using their shoot first, drive-by media, shoot first, ask questions later. Several factors point to a U.S. strike. One is the launching of an assessment of the incident by the U.S. military. According to the Pentagon's instructions on processes for mitigating civilian harm, an assessment is launched after a group of investigators make an initial determination that the U.S. military may bear culpability. A U.S. official, not named, told the AP that the strike was likely U.S. A U.S. official. How many deep state actors do we have in the Biden administration left over from the Biden administration that are undermining the Trump administration? Finding one is not a big deal. The officials spoke anonymously because they were not authorized to comment publicly on this sensitive matter, and because if they actually use their name, they'd have to produce actual evidence instead of just trying to throw out, undermine Trump. This use of anonymous sources needs to stop. If you can't put your name to it, you shouldn't be quoted. And we have had very solid evidence that the mainstream, lamestream, lying media in this country are more than happy to use anonymous sources that don't exist. Another is the location of the school next to a Revolutionary Guard base in Hermosa province and close to barracks for its naval brigade. It was in the neighborhood, and so that's evidence. The U.S. military is focused on naval targets and acknowledged strikes in the province, including one in the vicinity of the school. The U.S. is operating warships in the Arabian Sea, including the U.S. Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, within range of the school. That entire article has one anonymous source saying that we thought maybe it was the U.S., one backstabbing, undermining piece of crap working deep state in the Trump administration to try and undermine our country. That's what you've got here. Innuendo, circumstantial, zero credible evidence. And yet they're more than willing to put that story out and get it out there. And that's what everybody's going to be reading, that the U.S. hit a school and killed 165 children. No proof. The Iranian media's pointing the finger. That's enough. And it was in the neighborhood of a Revolutionary Guard office. That's it. No real evidence, but more than willing to put the story out there. That's what propaganda looks like right here in Maine and across the entire country. This has been put out there, mainstream media, and the local media picks up the AP story, puts it in the local paper, the suppressed Herald, to lie to the American people about what happened. They have no idea what happened. And there is a very good chance that firing off rockets right, left, and sideways, the Iranians had a rocket that misfired and landed in that school. Don't rule it out. This is what propaganda looks like. Don't forget that. It's happening every day in your local Suppress Herald newspaper here in Maine and in your local papers across the country and in Canada and in Europe. The media is no longer a journalistic operation doing what they're supposed to do, which is keeping power in check and managing to expose, public officials doing wrong. It's a propaganda machine for one side of the aisle, period. Let's move on to something that's bubbling up now, very much so. Global warming. They're losing the global warming battle, and that is not going to slow them down. Here's a article this week in the paper about Greenland, and this is so typical. Okay, you've got the headline. There's a big picture of a small boat in a fjord, a fishing boat in front of an iceberg at Disco Bay near Lulasat, Greenland, in January. It's too warm. That's the headline. Greenland's fishermen are under threat from climate change. And this is, goes into, oh, they aren't getting the fish they did, and so forth. While Trump's approach to Greenland has shifted, the world has been unable to slow the effects of climate change. The Arctic is warming faster than any other region in the world, driven by the burning of oil, gas, and coal. That is a speculation at best, a blatant lie at worst. That's what's repeated. Burning oil, gas, and coal. Let me tell you something. CO2, they're saying, is the culprit. I'm going to give you just one little piece of information here. CO2, which is from burning oil, gas, and coal, has gone up from 370 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere to 405 to 420, depending on where you're looking. So we've gone up from 30 parts per million, maybe 40 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. They're blaming it on burning coal, oil, and gas. Humans make CO2. There are a lot more humans on the planet. Animals produce CO2 when they breathe. There are a lot more animals. Here's a good one. Little bugs, including those bugs that bore into wood, termites, produce very large quantities of CO2. Isn't that interesting? Have we counted how many people, animals, all of these living things that breathe in oxygen and then exhale CO2, carbon dioxide, have had on the planet and on the CO2 levels in the atmosphere? Have we talked about any of the other things like volcanoes erupting, which spew millions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere? Wildfires, uncontrolled wildfires, like out in Los Angeles when they burned an entire city, basically. Massive amounts of CO2 released. That's called mismanagement, gross mismanagement by Los Angeles. And we had those massive fires with all that released CO2. All of those things. Water vapor, on the other hand, is in the air, and it is a greenhouse gas. Most people don't realize that. Water vapor accounts for about 5% of what's in the atmosphere, are particles in the atmosphere. Water vapor. At that rate, water vapor are about 50,000 parts per million in the atmosphere. 50,000 parts per million. CO2 is 400 parts per million, give or take. So if CO2 even doubles from 400 parts per million to 800 parts per million, what's that in comparison to a 5% increase in water vapor from 50,000 parts per million to 51,000 parts per million, or 52 and a half parts per million, or 52,500. That's a 2,500 parts per million increase at 5% versus a 100% increase going 400 parts per million. Does it start to make any sense? Clouds are a greenhouse gas. And if cloud cover, water vapor in the atmosphere increases at just a few percent, it's dramatically more parts per million, way, way more parts per million we're talking about a couple of decimal points larger than CO2. But we don't want to talk about that. So this whole thing, this is a lie at best. And well, it's a unknown at best and a lie at worst that climate change is the result of burning fossil fuels. But there you have it. The whole article goes in, talks about how they're having trouble with their fishery and so forth. And then you've got the sea is higher than we thought, and millions more are vulnerable, study finds. This is a really good article because if you read through, that's the headline. Millions more are vulnerable. Researchers calculated that roughly 90% of hazard assessments significantly underestimated baseline coastal water heights. And then they go through this whole convoluted explanation, which really makes no sense, that water is rising, the oceans are rising much faster than we thought. But then I want to move to the end. We'll make this short. At the end, this is the subheadline, maybe not so bad, some scientists say. Other outside scientists said that Minderhout and Seeger may be making too much of the problem. I think they're exaggerating the implications for impact studies a bit. The problem is actually well understood, albeit addressed in a way that could probably be improved, said Goneri Cozanet, a scientist at the French Geological Survey. Most local planners know their coastal issues and plan accordingly. The reality is we have many photographs of, call it, piers and waterfronts in bays and in harbors, city waterfronts on the water across the globe from 50 to 100 years ago. And then there are pictures today. And those same piers and docks are at the same level today as they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago, within inches. What this is scare tactics, all dressed up as pseudoscience, and most of it is lies. The climate change scammers, the climate change industry is running out of funding because their hoax is up and they're getting desperate and throwing this garbage out. This is not science. This is a scare tactic, and it's put into these articles that are put out there by people more than happy. Associated Press again. Seth Borenstein and Annika Hammerschlag from the Associated Press are more than happy to write this garbage, when the reality is they haven't done any real research on the science of this. And we have very significant evidence, photographic evidence, that the seas have not risen across the planet anywhere near what they're saying they have or will. Meanwhile, Antarctic ice in the southern Arctic is increasing dramatically. They're calving off big icebergs. But meanwhile, the ice shelf itself, the ice sheet in central Antarctica, millions of tons of additional ice are building up, which means that is water that is turning to ice and snow in Antarctica, millions of tons worth, are increasing. Maybe we should worry about too much snow and ice accumulating, freezing, and the seas lowering. Who knows? But the evidence is not anywhere near what they say. These catastrophic naysayers that are, woe is me and we're all going to die. And here you got Bill Gates came out, and that just blew everybody up, said our climate change is not an existential threat. Poverty and health, world health is more important. Yeah, this from a guy who's injecting people and experimenting on Africans with drugs that mostly killed them all. But regardless, they're in a panic because artificial intelligence models, most likely what led Bill Gates to get out ahead of saying, no, the climate change is not a existential threat. The computing power to actually go and examine the models they've been using, which have never proven useful or accurate, are nothing but garbage. Garbage in, garbage out. They were after a predetermined outcome so that they can continue funding their research, call it, and none of it is tracking their models in any way, shape, or form. So they come up with a new model. They come up with in this case, a new way of looking at the rising seas. Well, we haven't included, waves and tides and all, and we got to include waves and tides. Well, waves and tides change constantly. What is the actual sea level? Newer models using all of this, I don't know what you call it, gobbledygook, basically. How about just historic photos of waterfront properties with piers that have been there unchanged for 100 years, and there's the water level, very consistent now and 100 years ago. They don't like to see that, but those are out there if you're willing to look for them. So that's where we're at. The propaganda machine. We've got the anti-Trump. It has nothing to do. It's not anti-war. It's just anti-Trump because Trump is doing something that should have been done a long time ago, taking on Iran that's been at war with the United States and Israel for almost 50 years, killing our service members, terrorists, funding terror, causing mayhem across the globe. Trump said enough. We're going to shut this down. And those are not people that have been murdering people and death to America, death to Israel chants in public square in Iran. Those are not people you want to have a nuclear weapon. Trump did what needed to be done. And you've got the never Trumpers just can't get out of their way using propaganda, half truths, and just speculation to try and create opposition to Trump and the United States. And don't rule out bots and social media manipulation by Iranians' own digital warriors, Chinese digital warriors, Russian digital warriors, all trying to push back against Trump doing amazing things on reorganizing the world order to get rid of despots that have been there for decades and decades, ruining their people's lives, murdering people right, left, and sideways. In the case of the Iranians, reported 32,000 plus Iranians murdered, mass murder by the regime. And they're reporting and making a big deal out of a school. Now, this is not, I'm not minimizing this. 150, give or take, children killed in a school is a very serious thing. It's not a good thing. Where were these same media talking about 32,000 Iranians murdered, just shot, hung, murdered by the regime because they were speaking up about the regime being a bad government, speaking out about their government? Very little was said by the media about that. And now we've got this sketchy report about a school was hit. And I'm going to make a prediction. We're going to find out that it was one of the Iranians' missiles, ballistic missiles, misfired, landed in the school, and killed all their own people. We'll see in time. Things happen in war. It may have been a mistake by the US, but I'm going to put my prediction out there. So we'll see next time when we talk to you. If you like what you see with this podcast, if you like finding out what propaganda looks like on a local level and beyond, feel free to share, spread the word, follow my podcast. We'll try to get them out on a weekly basis and keep you up to date on what the propaganda machine is up to. As I've said many times, politics is local, so is propaganda, and we'll keep reporting on it. With that, have a great day.